So today I want to talk about the difference between lifelong learning and classroom learning, because lifelong learning and the retrievals or the lifelong retrieval of the information is what companies really want if they are talking about learning. But the tools that they are using are actually designed for classroom learning, and this is much better designed for short-term memory and tests. What's up, everybody? Rackwitz here. A major problem that we are confronted with when we're talking about learning or when we think about learning in class and education in general is that the conditions of instruction that makes performance, let's say, improve rapidly in order to be able to pass a test successfully often fail to support long-term retention and also knowledge transfer. Whereas conditions of instruction that appear to create difficulties for learners or for learner, slowing the rate of apparent learning, often optimize long-term retention and transfer. Does it make sense? So what I want to say is the point that there are some kind of learning conditions that enhance learning that we want to achieve or results that we want to achieve in learning in classroom situations. As to say, you learn something, you learn a lot of stuff, you have to memorize the stuff, and then you are writing the test and hopefully you pass the test. And on the other side, we have that kind of long-term retention of the knowledge, lifelong learning, where we want you to learn something and then, let's say, 3, 4, 5 months or years later, you are still able to retrieve the information. And what science found out is that there's a difference between these two learning conditions. So if you need short-term short-term successful learning, for example, passing tests in the near future, now that it makes sense to get that kind of information in a kind of way where we have to do block learning, where we repeat all the stuff that we need to learn as often as possible and so on. But there are totally different kind of conditions that lead to long-term retention, to long-term knowledge and learning. And the point is that normally if we're talking to companies or if companies are interested in using, for example, gamification to improve learning, they are talking about lifelong learning. What they want to have or want to achieve is that people are assessing information and then, if possible or if necessary in the future, if they really need that kind of knowledge, they are able to retrieve the information from their memory. This is what they want to have, but what they are installing actually often is some kind of learning environment that's more mirroring the context like we know it from classrooms. So where we know exactly, where an employee is given some kind of information, he has given time to sit down to learn it, perhaps he's playing a game and then by answering questions or whatever, but it's always this kind of block learning and then have to use that kind of learning in a short-term future. So, and get a test, pass the test, and then it's gone. So the point is there's a difference between what companies want to achieve with learning, but also with using gamification for learning, and what they are really installing. And this is what I want to talk about today. And there's a guy, he's called Bjork, I think. And he has done a lot of research. He's from the UCLA. He's done a lot of research about all that kind of stuff, on the differences of these learning environments. He has an amazing video talk out there. It's called How We Think We Learn and How We Learn. And I really can recommend it. I will put the link in the YouTube description below of the video. And so you should really watch this video if you're interested in how to create the best environment for long life learning. So to sum it up, the point is he came up with four main, let's say, conditions and characteristics of learning that benefit long life learning, long-term retention of the knowledge. The first, for example, is retrieval. So what he says is that when the point is retrieval information means that you have to memorize what you have learned and then get the information out of the memory again, back again, and use it or whatever, transfer it into a different kind of context, whatever. This is already something that's different because you're learning something and then there's a break, for example, whatever, there's a different kind of context, another situation, and then you're coming back and you have to retrieve that kind of information out of your memory. And the act of retrieval, the act of retrieving the information, so retrieval information, that's what makes it so successful for long-term learning. Because every time you have to retrieve something out of your memory, so retrieving the information is exactly the process that creates some kind of long-term learning. Another point that he's talking about is spacing. That means that you have these kind of chunks between the learning session and another learning session. So let's imagine you're learning about problem A, then you need the spacing, so I'm confronting you with a problem B, another learning stuff. And then perhaps I'm confronting you with learning C. And after that, I'm confronting you again with the learning A. So you have to come back. So we have the spacing that's being filled with B and C, and then you come back to A. So it doesn't become boring, different kind of stuff that you have to learn, and after A, you come back the second time to the problem B, and so on. You see what I mean? So you have these chunks. And the best thing is that then these chunks then can be connected to each other. And so it's already helping you to learn more about transferring knowledge into totally different kind of situations. The third thing, so after retrieval and spacing, that he's talking about is varying conditions. What he means by that is that if you learn a particular content or stuff, problem, whatever, information, only within a given kind of context. So let's say only within this kind of environment of this room. So if I'm only being confronted with a particular part of information within a particular given space, my brain starts to connect that kind of information with that kind of space. That means that as long as I'm within that space, it's easier for me to retrieve that kind of information that I've just learned. But if I'm in another context, in the future, in another situation, whatever, it's more difficult for me to retrieve that kind of information. So in order to break that up, it makes sense to give you the same kind of information in different kind of context. Location, time, situation where we are in from, where we are involved right now, and so on. The fourth structure and element is interleaving. Interleaving means that you're not just focusing on one part or one kind of problem, but on different ones. And similar to the example that I just told you with the spacing. So first you have A, then you have problem B, then you have problem C. But with interleaving, he means he's not talking about that you're looking at this from a point of view of a time frame, like with spacing, but more from a, let's say, content characteristics. So you're learning about problem A, and then because of learning about problem A, for example, it makes sense now to think about problem B, because they are, they're similar, and it could be that they can help each other and so on. And so by interleaving different kind of content pieces, it also helps you to create some kind of lifelong learning. And again, it's similar to games, because as more complex games are, or as more complex they become, you have to interleave all these different kind of learning skills and situations and so on. So the four main characteristics that he's talking about when it comes to lifelong learning, we can find being built natively inside of games. So that makes it really interesting if we think about how to use games or gamification in companies to enhance lifelong learning. The difficulty here is to make it clear, to help companies to realize that it's not a learning, or it doesn't help if you create a learning environment that's classroom-like, so that where we know exactly we have to sit down or we have to put in a game, and then we have a chunk of time, focus on the problem, learn it, and then perhaps we have a quiz or whatever, some kind of test, and we pass it. Yeah, we have passed the test, yes, perhaps we get the certificate, but the overall goal to create this lifelong learning for the employees, we haven't achieved anything there. So we have, and the difficulty is that it's difficult to combine both of that. So if you create environment for lifelong learning, probably your people will be worse in passing the test, and the other way around. And so before you start creating a learning environment, no matter if we're talking about creating it with game thinking behind that or creating just simple e-learning or whatever, you really have to know what you want to achieve. Do you want to have short-term achievements? For example, because your employees just need a certification because you have to do that by law or whatever, and then it's gone, and they never have to use the knowledge again, then it's okay. If you're talking about lifelong learning, educating your employees to become more better in the future, to create better innovations or whatever, and if you want them to really execute on that kind of knowledge in the future, you have to change how we are creating learning environments and also learning content and learning conditions like tests and whatever. And this is something that comes by heart when I really talk about that. When you think about using game thinking, gamification, serious games, whatever, game-based learning, in order to improve learning in companies, it's far less about making the content itself more interesting. It's far more about creating the right context for learning. Just a short example, if I'm able to create an environment, a context that triggers your curiosity to learn something new, I can give you the information that you want to learn as in a book with 1,000 pages, just boring reading stuff. But because you have the curiosity, you're triggered to learn that, you know exactly why you want to do that. You're sitting down and you probably will read a lot about that, and you will remember it because you want to. But if you don't know about the purpose of learning material, if you're not triggered in any kind of way, perhaps by curiosity, then just making it more entertaining, the content, like it looks nice, 3D, virtual reality, sounds, missions, stories, whatever, I just create something that's less boring than the actual learning, but actually I'm more distracting you and try to entertain you instead of building the right context for you for long life learning. So it's not about pimping the content itself. 80% is about creating the right context, and then for the last 20%, think about how can you create better content or create better formats that are supporting the first 80%.